Thank you very much, Felice. Hello, bonjour, everyone. I do apologize, I'm going to speak in English. I know 3 languages, but French isn't one of them, and I do apologize. So, my name is Tetyana Rocks. I'm director of the Food4Mood Academy. So, Food4Mood Academy is part of Food4Mood Center, and what we're trying to do is to bring research to life through accessible and simple education. So Felice mentioned a couple of our courses, which I hope you will pay attention to. But what I'll try to do now in my next short session is talk about what and how could be changed to support our mental health. So hopefully, through Felice's talk, you saw that we consistently see research linking food intake to mental health outcomes. We also know that people who can change their dietary intake able to support their mental health a little bit better. But how do we actually do it? That's a $20,000 question, or even more. So let's have a look. How do we actually do it? I will use the SMILES trial, which Felice mentioned, as an example. So SMILES trial was, of course, the very first randomized controlled trial which used diet to treat mental health symptoms. It was conducted in people living with clinical depression. So let's unpack and let's have a look what SMILES trial actually done. We had some other trials which use kind of principles of Mediterranean diet in them. And all of them were focusing on increasing the good stuff, as we say, and decreasing the bad stuff, basically. So all idea when we change dietary intake, it's to support people eating better, eating greater variety, enjoying their fruit, vegetables, and plant food, and grains and nuts, and decreasing consumption of those ultra-processed or discretionary foods. So foods which have very high addition of sugar, or salt, or fats, or any other nasties which we don't really need. So SMILES trial was the modified Mediterranean diet. On afternoon, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Mediterranean diet, but SMILES trial was slightly different because it was conducted in Australia. Australian people do love their meat. So we actually made the portions or made the recommendations for meat are slightly greater than in the traditional Mediterranean diet. So this is pyramid which was created specifically for the SMILES trial. So it's Mediterranean style diet. As you can see, it's based on plants, basically, on consumption of plants. So whole grains, fruit and vegetables, olive oil as a main fat, nuts, legumes, a little bit more of red meat than in a traditional Mediterranean diet, fatty fish, poultry, eggs, and see that on top extras, very tiny bit, that's your discretionary foods. That's those ultra-processed foods, so recommendations were quite low for these ones. So people basically, how we run the SMILES trial, people got in touch with dietitians. So we see consistently in research when dietary interventions are developed, designed and run by dietitians, the usually effect size is greater and benefits for consumers are larger as well. Do we have any dietitians in the room? Nutritionists? They're great people to work with. So do we have practitioners? We have psychiatrists, psychologists, GPs, so just physicians? Yep, so work with dietitians and nutritionists. They're really, really good people. I'm a dietitian. So it's not just about telling people to eat carrots. It's about understanding how we can actually improve our dietary intake. Little by little, we all can do something a little bit better. It's never have to be perfect, but it can be better. So, but let's go back to the SMILES trial and have a look what we actually recommended people would eat. So that's foods which were recommended for daily consumption. So we talk about whole grain cereals. We talk about vegetables, 6 serves of vegetables. a lot of vegetables. But that's what we understand is very, very helpful for our gut microbiota and for our overall well-being. We also encourage people to consume fruit, dairy, nuts every day, and use the extra virgin olive oil as a main fat in their diet. So cooking with extra virgin olive oil or adding it into their cooked dishes. We also recommended people to eat weekly some legumes. I know in France, which is very good to see, so far I noticed legumes are much more popular than, say, in Australia. It was very difficult to convince some people to actually try legumes. But these are fantastic. They're, of course, excellent source of protein, all the vitamins, polyphenols, many, many phytochemicals, and they're usually pretty affordable too. So once people know how to cook them, they're actually pretty keen on legumes. We also recommended people to consume lean red meat, fatty fish, because we know fish is a fantastic source of omega-3 fatty acids, poultry, eggs, and see those extras, tiny little extras right at the bottom. So we ask people to reduce them to 3 serves per week. Sometimes I get questions about serves. So people say, well, 6 to 8 serves of grains, it's probably a lot. Yes, it is a lot, but remember that in SMILES trial, people work with dietitian, and dietitian help them to understand how many serves they perhaps need. We understand that some young and active people, people who run around a lot, teenagers, of course they will need more serves of whole grains and everything else. People who sit at their desks most of the time, or elderly, or people less active, will need adjustment with the serves. That's why it's good to work with dietitians, because we actually train to understand that. We help people to change their diet. So it's pointless just to tell people, you gotta eat more veggies. We kind of all know that. It's about how we can do it. So this is one of the resources which was provided for people in the SMILES trial. As you can see, very simple concepts to put together a meal. And people do need this, and a little bit later in a couple slides, I'll talk about how we need to support this, because people, unfortunately, now growing up without knowing food, without understanding what food is. Because even if we look back 1 or 2 generations, most of us live with the families. Our parents were less busy. We're also busy now, busy. We don't teach our children anything. In Australia, it's interesting, and because I have adult children, I had to go through it. We spend, in some state, 200 hours to teach our kids how to drive. So driving is very important, isn't it? But is it essential skill? Yet cooking and understanding food is essential, and we just don't spend enough time. Imagine if we all invest 200 hours into teaching younger people how to eat. The difference it could make. So we do need support to support people with meal ideas. You know, when Phyllis was talking about that, for our gut health and microbiota diversity, amount and diversity of plants is very important. There are studies showing that or people who consume about 30 different plants a week have much better, much diverse and healthier gut microbiota. And when you say to people whose diet may be not the best, if you say to them, you need to eat different 30 plants a week, how do you do that if they don't eat plants? So you need to show how to actually do it. So that's what we provide, ideas and some simple recipes for people to understand how to do it. With snacks, we also usually recommend for people to consume raw fruit, dried fruit, raw vegetables, dairy, or nuts and seeds. This is something which very easy to kind of have around, to store, to carry with you, always available, and most of the time affordable as well. So top 10 recommendations from the SMILES trial were to select fruit, vegetables and nut as a snack. Include vegetables with every meal. Anyone in the room includes vegetables with every meal? Yes. People who know do. So hopefully you might like to start doing that too. It's pretty good actually. So select whole grain breads and cereals. We had fantastic variety of breads here, so we know that whole grain is the best for us. Also to eat legumes. I think French people know what to do with their legumes, but that's a fantastic recommendations as well. It should be fatty fish, not fermented fish, but you can go and have a go at fermented fish. They're quite tasty too. I grew up eating fermented fish. Eat lean red meat 3 to 4 times per week. Remember, that's for Aussies. Aussies, Australians do like their red meat, so that's why we kept it there. The tiny serves, yes. Dairy, of course, very important. As I mentioned, olive oil as a main added fat, and try to reduce your consumption of sweets or anything with too many added ingredients. And of course, water should be the main source of hydration, not wine, strangely enough, water. All right, so it's all very well. Okay, we know kind of what to do. How do we actually convince people? How do we make changes for ourselves? Should we like to change something? And how we can help our patients, clients, our loved ones, our children to change what they eat. So in general, what we understand that if we talk about diet and exercise go together very well. So if we discuss diet, exercise should be kind of there somewhere as well. We do need to work with behavior. So because it's not just about telling people what they should be doing, it's helping them to change behavior. It should be, any interventions should be delivered by qualified staff. So anyone who doesn't have background in, say, nutrition or dietetics, Phyllis mentioned, we are running nutritional psychiatry course, which been endorsed by our College of Psychiatrists, and that should help you to kind of understand how to implement dietary changes. We also have, when we talk about lifestyle interventions, it's very important that if you work in a team or in a health settings, that team is actually on board with what you're trying to achieve. And if you can, if you're working with people living with mental health issues, include peer support. When we communicate diet-related messages, it's very important how we do that. I actually noticed here that I used catchy phrases in English. I'm not sure if they translate so well in French. But to start with, timing is absolutely everything. We need to know when to recommend changes or when to start changes. Quite often I speak with parents and they tell me, oh, my child going, say, through exams. It's such a stressful time. How do I make them change the diet? So stop back and think, is that the best time to start implementing some changes? You do need, for changes take time, so you do need to find a good time for them. If you do talk to someone who you given the recommendations to, you do need to make them center of attention. Quite often when we talk with consumers, or even we just talk with our friends, we don't listen enough. We need to listen to people and understand what they actually want. We understand that any changes should start very, very small. Small changes support that long-term lifestyle adaptation, not black and white approach, not, from Monday, I'm gonna change absolutely everything, from Tuesday, I'm gonna change something else. That's, you're setting yourself up for the failure. So small steps, small realistic steps are better. We also need to support people and actually believe in change. Unfortunately, quite often when we talk to health professionals, they not always believe that people living, particularly with severe mental disorders, can change and can change their diet, for example. Whereas I work a lot with consumers or people who actually with lived experience, And they absolutely want this. That's what they want. They want to feel as a whole person. They want to focus on their well-being. We do need to know how to break the bad barriers, because there's a lot of issues in changing, in any change. Anything you like to change, you're gonna come up with issues. So working with people, working together to understand what issues are and how we can change them is very important. And also, we need to remember that it's never final. It's a lifelong approach. So as we say, it's not goodbye, it's see you later. Let's have a look at some of the barriers and how to perhaps address them. So one of the biggest barrier is a lack of motivation. That's when people say that, look, why would I care about diet? It's interestingly, consumers and health professionals say the same. So we do need to understand the level of motivation, how interested people are. Remember, I was talking about timing as well, because maybe that's not for them. Maybe they will try that later on. So we need to facilitate positive conversation around food. You know how Phyllis mentioned, and I've been dietitian for a while, for few decades, we point the message, we focus the message around body size. And it's very stigmatizing. It's very uncomfortable conversation to have with patients. So if you start with a positive conversation, use real life examples, and kind of discourage that all or nothing approach. If you explain to people that it's not about losing weight, it's about supporting well-being, that's also gonna help with motivation. And of course, it's important to be non-judgmental, empathetic, positive, and actually believe in change. How do you start talking about diet if you're not trained in this? So there's a few simple questions. You can ask people something like, can I ask you about what you usually eat? Or how many serves of vegetables you have per day? Or even if they usually eat with family or friends, do they have somebody around them to eat with? Or, for example, how does healthy food look to you? Everyone have different ideas and understanding. So kind of trying to figure out, asking these questions will help you also understand where a person is in their readiness to change. So this is trans-theoretical model, which we as dietitians quite often use when we talk about behavior change. So because it's important to understand that if person is in number one, pre-contemplation phase, it's probably pointless to try to change something. They're not going to be responsive. We need to get people into phase two by discussing that with them, by maybe trying to find different ways to create that contact and rapport, that nice conversation with people. When people in stage 3, we also know that that's where we need to give all the support and absolutely all the resources. And then changes 4 and 5, stages 4 and 5. But it's important to understand where people are, because even if you refer to dietitian, if you have a patient who is stage 1, your referral or your recommendation to go and see dietitian not going to be used. Remember how I said we really need to help people to create very small goals. We call them SMART goals. So, and it doesn't have to be a goal. Some people don't like what goal. You say to them goal, they don't like it. So you can encourage conversation about ways of changing. And it doesn't have to be, I'm gonna eat obscene amount of vegetables and I'm not gonna eat any junk food. It could be something as simple as I'll enjoy fruit every morning and see how it is. That's people need to kind of be encouraged about easy changes. Or maybe it's something about planning and cooking. There's other types of SMART goals and examples you can use in your practice as well. What about lack of knowledge and skills? I talk about how we don't cook at home, how we don't live with family and friends and our our grandparents. So quite often people just don't know actually how to eat. And that's easy to form different perception around food, particularly if you're under influence, say, of social media. So you do need to support development of very basic skills. Again, ask people, what do they know? Can they plan their shopping? Do they have somewhere to store their food? That's important. Discuss easy food options. Although it's interesting actually, driving through Paris and walking through Paris, I haven't noticed too many junk food stores like McDonald's or Hungry Jack's. Are they around? Or then, because they kind of somehow they're hidden. In Australia, you step into any main street and they're everywhere. It's just horrendous. But here they well hidden, I suppose. So, but you do need to discuss that with people because even in McDonald's, you can find something a little bit better for you. It doesn't have to be black and white. You can also give people very easy kind of foundational tools to know what to do, to know how to go, to know how to tick off vegetables and fruit and grains. This is a very interesting example from one of the groups of practitioners we're working with. It's in Australia, and it's a work of community care center. So it's a step-down center for people who've been released from hospital after schizophrenia or major psychotic episode, and they're basically trying to adapt to life. And whole team there in that CCU doing fantastic job to actually implement lifestyle approaches to health for people. They have stuff like, Psych and Easy. They cook together because they know that sometimes people don't know what to cook. So practitioners and consumers cook together and eat together. They grow in vegetables on the premises and herbs to show how it can be done. So you do need to do that. So unhealthy food environment, as I mentioned before, could be tricky. That's why we do need to help people to plan, to do shopping, to organize their budget, and to know what options out there. Telling people you shouldn't eat McDonald's, it's not good enough if you don't tell them what they should be or could be eating. We also need to provide people with practical resources. Remember how I mentioned that in the SMILES trial? That was very successful, because it shows people that you don't actually have to have, 40 ingredients ragu. You can simply put together a few ingredients to make yourself a meal. Examples like this, healthy plate. Again, visual, simple, everyone kind of understand, and it's a great tool to start discussion around diet. We do these little cards, which are very popular with consumers and practitioners alike. Again, simple examples, so people, when they go home after discussion, they actually feel that they equipped for a change. Very quick note on increasing fiber. So quite often when we ask people to change their diet, we start to implementing changes very, very quickly. And we know because people living with mental health disorders quite often have comorbid gut disorder. So we do need to go kind of steady and easy and explain to people that if we start increasing our fiber, we might see some changes in our gastrointestinal system, and it's need time to adapt. Okay, so with cost, again, there's a perceived and real high cost of healthier diet. Although, as Felice mentioned, majority of the trials which use diet as intervention also did cost effectiveness, and it showed it's not just good for health system, but actually consumers, if they buy healthier food, spend less. People just need to know what to buy, how to cook at home. We do also need to discuss perception of marketing, particularly with kids, because as I said, having two young adults, I kind of worked with that, when kids just don't understand that kind of building that knowledge around food will save them a lot of money in the long run. And of course, support services. In Australia, we do have pretty good support services which can help people with food banks. I'm sure there's something like that in France as well. This is another example of simple budgeting and planning resources, and in our course for practitioners, the one which Felice mentioned, the one which endorsed and recommended by our Royal College of Psychiatry, we give all this information to people just to be equipped and to understand how to talk about budgeting. One important note here, and Felice mentioned that, and I mentioned that too, we need to support better choices, but not discourage people from eating, because shaming people about their body or about their food choices not gonna do anything good, particularly in kids, when we know as soon as you start talking about food, kids think about, or young people think about their appearance, and they place a lot of attention around body image. So, and understand that some people have very unrealistic expectations, some people compare themselves to adults, and all this as a result could really increase risk of disordered eating. So to avoid is that it's very important to discuss, as I said, particularly with younger people, but eating disorders unfortunately can strike at any age, that bodies do come in very different shapes and sizes, and it's normal. And when we talk about food, we need to try and avoid that negative language. Back in Australia, we piloted very interesting module for local high school, where we discussed with kids food, but we didn't talk about their body size. We talked about their gut health. And this was very interesting. So all kids of different size in the room all feel very included. No one felt that like they've been singled out because of their body size. So talking about and linking food to something positive, to cognitive outcomes, to their behavior or to sport achievements, it's much better than linking it to weight. And few simple steps, we like to do simple steps and tricks and tips. So if you can, we always recommend for people to plan and prepare their meals. Of course, when you work with people who live with clinical depression, we have a saying, depressed people don't batch cook. So when you're depressed, you don't focus on cooking and freezing and stuff like that. So, but planning and preparing your meal can help you in the long run. If you can change anything, and if you like to change anything, enjoy a variety of plant-based foods. They are fantastic. If you're changing your plans, start somewhere easy. It's pointless buying Jerusalem artichoke if you don't know what to do with that. I can't even pronounce that. So start simple, start with carrots or whatever you like. And listen to your body and actually do what's best for you. So it is a lifelong approach. There's no quick fixes. There's no all or nothing. And we should really think about that for us and for our patients or loved ones. We do need to find time to prepare, eat, and enjoy food, and aim for a variety of plant-based foods. Both myself and Felice say plant-based foods so many times. We're just trying to convince everyone to love plants the way we do. And remember, lifestyle factors, although modifiable, including diet, are only one determinant of mental health. There's so many other things we could be doing. Diet is fantastic, but there's so many other factors. Let's try to be positive, because no matter what, we need to believe in change in us. We need to believe in change in our consumers and our patients as well. And if you want any more training or any more information, this is course, that's what we recommend for consumers. So this is very accessible language, very simple. and over 80,000 people from around the world. Great testament that it's actually a very accessible course. And this course is for postgraduate people, so for practitioners. I would love to see you in the course. It's starting on 3rd of July, and I'm a chair of the course, and Felice there as well. So hopefully I will see you there. Thank you very much.
If you don't mind joining, Felice will give ourselves 10 minutes for questions from the room. We have time. Yeah, stay with us, please, Tetyana. Yes.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting and amazing. I'm a psychiatrist, and what do you think about vegetarian diet and the recommendation about the meat in the light of greenhouse gas emissions and the cost, the environmental cost of meat? And do you recommend omega-3 fatty acids as supplementation because it's difficult to get enough fatty acids?
What we see in all of the data from across the world is that, obviously people eat varying amounts. Some people are vegan, vegetarian, omnivores. As long as people are having many, many plants, having some meat doesn't seem to be problematic in terms of their health, mental health, their gut health. It's really important to reinforce avoidance of processed meats because they do seem to be problematic. But there are obviously ethical and environmental aspects to meat consumption that are also things to consider. Young women who are menstruating, there's some evidence to suggest it may be problematic to avoid red meat altogether without, being really careful about ensuring enough iron. But in general, it seems that people can make choices about how much meat that they have, as long as it's within that, I would say 2 to 3 small palm-sized servings a week and not more than that. But, that or less than that is all going to be part of a balanced diet. If people are not having meat at all, particularly if they're menstruating, they do need to think about making sure they have enough iron.
I'll add one question to that. We in France like very much cheese and chocolate. And so what's the position in that respect? Are they in the top very mini thing that we should just have 3 times a week at best?
It's not only in France people like cheese and chocolate, I have to tell you that. And also about your question about meat, it's a great question. Me as vegetarian for over 35 years now, I'm probably not the best person to speak. I do understand that people can eat quite successfully various and get enough, everything they need from their diet being vegetarian, but they do need to work with nutrition professional who can help them to kind of meet their needs. And yeah, cheese and chocolate, where would we be without cheese and chocolate? Cheese was as a recommendation for 2 to 3 serves per day, so that's very good. And chocolate, there's different types of chocolates. There's chocolates with very high polyphenol content, and of course they're fine. People always ask me, is it okay if I will eat some chocolate? And who am I to tell people not to eat chocolate?
We've actually done quite a lot of work looking at dairy and the link with mental health, and it seems to be largely neutral. So, some studies suggest that it's inversely associated with depression, others that it's positive, but in general it comes out as pretty neutral, except for fermented dairy. So things like yogurt and kefir, that seems to be beneficial. So I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that people need to avoid dairy. Cheese is delicious.
With the calendar on climate that Guillaume was suggesting, actually cheese and chocolate are really worse than meat, so red meat.
Yeah, dairy production, that's very true.
I have a question here.
Thank you so much, Felice and Tetyana, for the fantastic work you're doing. My question to you is about intermittent fasting, and if you have a look at if there is a combination of favorable or non-favorable if added to a dietary approach.
I don't think that there's any research to date on intermittent fasting in humans and mental health. Certainly a lot of the animal data have not seemed to translate in humans. So as far as I'm aware, it's an open question at the moment. Have you heard of anything?
No, so when we start talking about fasting, I think what we're confused about it's animal trials and translating that, as Felice said, into human data. Because with animals, it's become a feeding trial. You feed animals, you don't feed animals. With humans, it's so much harder. From eating disorder perspective, and I'm also on one of my research areas, eating disorders. So from eating disorder perspective, fasting is a dangerous territory because sometimes when people deprive themselves of food, when they start eating, sometimes it's harder to stop. However, if people keen to try fasting, usually how it works, they fast in the evening when we know people consume the majority of that discretionary food. So for some people, fasting might work, but we simply don't have enough data to recommend that.
Okay, I'm just out of a week's fasting, so I think that it's a bit hard to associate fasting and eating disorders, but that's a point of view. And I think there are some data on the impact of fasting on immunity, for example, and things like that, but not specifically on mental health. Not that I know of, but there.
I remember having read some paperwork, some articles on intermittent fasting and Alzheimer's disease. Both in the UK, I don't have the exact reference right now, but in the UK and in one team in UCLA. And they were quite interesting, by the way. Oh, by the way, I have 2 questions. Thank you so much for a captivating presentation and research and work. And I have a question about how do you blend with cultural habits in terms of food and cooking and because sometimes, you know, you have like not special diet, but traditional diets that are very high in carbohydrate, for example, in Brazil, in South America, or in many countries. And in some countries there are, you know, less fibers or less like berries or less fruits. So how do you...
I don't think it matters the details. You know, like when we look at the literature from around the world, traditional diets everywhere, whether they're traditional Japanese or, you know, Norwegian or Brazilian or Indian, all of them have at their heart a higher intake of unprocessed foods, plant foods, and a much lower intake of these discretionary foods. And all of them are associated with better mental health outcomes. So they have different profiles. You know, a traditional Norwegian diet looks very different to a traditional, say, British diet, but as long as they have at their heart a host of unprocessed foods, they seem to be associated with better mental health outcomes. So I don't think the diet has to be perfect. It doesn't have to be prescriptive. I think the focus should always just be on increasing plant foods, increasing the diversity of plant foods, and reducing the discretionary foods. And personally, I would suggest adding in some fermented foods as well. But working with people, different backgrounds. I mean, we did a study in the Tower Hamlets in London, in East London, which is a very socially deprived area. A study I did with Barts and the London School of Medicine years ago, and we looked at adolescents in those settings, you know, very culturally diverse settings, and even in those settings where you had real social issues, lack of social support, drugs, alcohol, etc., even there we saw relationships between the amount of vegetables that young people were consuming, and this could be in curries and stews and all sorts of things, traditional diets, and better mental health outcomes. So we've also done epidemiological work in Brazil and China and India, and again shown that when you look at all the predictors of poor mental health there, low vegetable consumption comes out as a significant relationship to worse mental health. So the traditional diet, as long as it's got those components of whole foods and plant foods, etc.,